Looking at the so-called, quote-unquote, slave period in North America, all you're looking at is the reintroduction or the imposition of artificial dark ages upon the descendants of the same Moors that brought the Europeans out of the dark ages with the Renaissance. Are we clear? It is an artificial construct and political activity of artificially putting or pushing the heirs into the dark ages, who are the descendants of the ones who brought them out of the dark ages. Thus, that sets the groundwork for the politics that is running the planet Earth today. All right? Are you following me? So now let's go into the secret Treaty of Verona so that you can comprehend their mental and their activities in their relationship to you, how they're dealing with you, what their motivations are. Are we clear? Congressional record, the Senate. The 64th Congress, first session, volume 53, part 7, page 6781, day 25 of April, 1916. The Northgate, North America, etc. And this is all, would be Senator Owens anyway. I wish to put into the record the secret Treaty of Verona of November the 22nd, 1822, showing what this ancient conflict is between the rule of the few and the rule of the many. And I wish to call the attention of the Senate to this treaty because it is the threat of this treaty which was the basis of the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine. It throws a powerful white light upon the conflict between monarchical government and government by the people. The Holy Alliance, under the influence of Metternich, the Premier of Austria, in 1822 issued this remarkable secret document. American Diplomatic Code, 1778 to 1884, Volume 2, Eliot, page 179. Secret Treaty of Verona. It contains 7 articles. Article 1, the high contracting powers being convinced that the system of representative government is equally as incompatible with the monarchical principles as the maxim of the sovereignty of the people with the high divine right, engage mutually in the most solemn manner to use all their efforts to put an end to the system of representative governments in whatever country it may exist in Europe, and to prevent its being introduced in those countries where it is not yet known. Article 2, Secret Treaty of Verona. As it cannot be doubted that the liberty of the press is the most powerful means used by the pretended supporters of the rights of nations, to the detriment of those princes, the high contracting parties promise reciprocally to adopt all proper measures to suppress it. Not only in their own states, but also in the rest of Europe. Secret Treaty of Verona, Article 3. Pay attention to the details. convinced that the principles of religion contribute most powerfully to keep the nations in the state of passive obedience, which they owe to their princes. The high contracting parties declare it to be their intention to sustain in their respective states those measures which the clergy may adopt with the aim of ameliorating their own interests. So intimately connected with the preservation of the authority of the princes and the contracting powers join in offering their thanks to the Pope. Offering their thanks to the Pope for what he has already done for them, and solicit his constant cooperation in their views of submitting the nations. Secret Treaty of Verona, Article 4. The situation of Spain and Portugal unite unhappily all the circumstances which the treaty has particular reference. The high contracting parties, in confiding to France the care of putting an end to them, engaged to assist her in the manner which may the least compromit them with their own people and to the people of France by means of a subsidy on the part of the two empires of 20 million of francs every year from the due of the signature of this treaty to the end of the war. Secret Treaty of Verona, Article 5. In order to establish in the peninsula the order of things which which existed before the revolution of Cadiz, that's C-A-D-I-S, it's also spelled with a K. And to ensure the entire execution of the articles to the present treaty, the high contracting parties give to each other the reciprocal assurance that as long as the views are not fulfilled, rejecting all other ideas of utility or other measures to be taken, they will address themselves with the shortest possible delay to all the authorities existing in their states and to all their agents in foreign countries, with a view to establish connections tending toward the accomplishment of the objects proposed by this treaty. Secret Treaty of Verona, Article 6. This treaty shall be renewed with such changes as new circumstances may give occasion for, either at a new Congress or at the court of one of the contracting parties, as soon as the war with Spain shall be terminated. Secret Treaty of Verona, Article 7. The present treaty shall be ratified and the ratifications exchanged at Paris within the space of 6 months. Made at Verona on the 22nd day of November, 1822. Back to Senator Owen. After the signing of Australia, Metternich, France, Chateaubriand, Prussia, Bernstedt, Russia, Nesselrode. Back to the senator. And I asked to have printed in the congressional record this secret treaty because I think it ought to be called now to the attention of the people of the United States and of the world. And this evidence of the conflict between the rule of the few versus popular government should be emphasized on the minds of the people of the United States, that this conflict now waging throughout the world may be more clearly understood. For after all is said, the great pending war springs from the weakness and frailty of government by the few, where human error is far more probable than the error of the many, where aggressive war is only permitted upon the authorizing vote of those whose lives are jeopardized in the trenches of modern war. Mr. Shafroth, Mr. President, I should like to have the senator state whether in that treaty there was not a coalition formed between the powerful countries of Europe to reestablish the sovereignty of Spain and the republics of South and Central America. Mr. Owen, I was just going to comment upon that. And I'm going to take just a few moments to do so because I realize the pressure of other matters. And the Holy Alliance, having put a Bourbon prince upon the throne of France by force, then used France to suppress the Constitution of Spain immediately afterwards. And by this very treaty gave her a subsidy of 20 million francs annually to enable her to wage war upon the people of Spain and to prevent their exercise of any measure of the right of self-government. And the Holy Alliance immediately did the same thing in Italy by sending Austrian troops to Italy, where the people then attempted to exercise a like measure of liberal constitutional self-government. And it was not until the printing press, which the Holy Alliance so stoutly opposed, taught the people of Europe the virtue of liberty, that finally one country after another seized a greater and greater right of self-government, until now it may be fairly said that nearly all of the nations of Europe have a very large measure of self-government. However, I wish to call to the attention of the Senate that the country to this important history in the growth of constitutional popular self-government, and the Holy Alliance made its powers felt by the wholesale drastic suppression of the press in Europe, by universal censorship, by killing free speech and all the ideas of popular rights, and by the complete suppression of popular government. The Holy Alliance, having destroyed popular government in Spain and in Italy, had well-laid plans also to destroy popular government in the American colonies, which had revolted from Spain and Portugal in Central and South America under the influence of the successful example of the United States. And it was because of the conspiracy against the American republics by the European monarchies that the great English statesman Canning called the attention of our government to it. And our statesmen then, including Thomas Jefferson, took an active part to bring about the declaration by President Monroe in his next annual message to the Congress of the United States that the United States should regard it as an act of hostility to the government of the United States and an unfriendly act if this coalition or if any power of Europe ever undertook to establish upon the American continent any control of any American republic or to acquire any territorial rights. And this is the so-called Monroe Doctrine. And the threat under this secret Treaty of Verona to suppress the popular governments in the American republics is the basis of the Monroe Doctrine. It is the basis of the Monroe Doctrine. It's the basis of the Monroe Doctrine. This secret treaty sets forth clearly the conflict between monarchical government and the popular government, and the government of the few as against the government of the many. It is a part in reality of developing popular sovereignty when we demand for women equal rights to life, to liberty, and to the possession of property, to an equal voice in the making of the laws and the administration of the laws. This demand on the part of women is made by men, and it ought to be made by men as well as by thinking, progressive women, as it will promote human liberty and human happiness. And I sympathize with it, and I hope that all the parties will, in the national conventions, give their approval to this larger measure of liberty to the better half of the human race. The experience we have had has made us acquainted with the many advantages that have been taken to the society of its intervention in the marriages of the House of Austria and of those which have affected in other countries, in other kingdoms, France, Poland, and in various duchies. Forasmuch assembling, proposing with prudence, selecting choice persons who may be friends and families of the relatives and of the friends of the society, it will be easy to gain the princesses, making use of their valets, by that coming to feed and nourish with the relations of friendship, by being located at the entrance in all parts, and thus become acquainted with the most intimate secrets of the familiars. Instructions, secret instructions of the company of Jesus, chapter 2. This is a short introduction of the discussion with the knights in the Senate. Are we clear? It is to let you know that all politicians are aware of this. They discuss it. They discussed it. And the principle of operations is to overthrow all Republican forms of government. I suggest to you, to all of you, that as you read some of the earlier books, history books, in your schools, some which have been removed as of late years, where they make reference to the institutionalization of slavery in the southern states, one of the strategies that was done was the dissolution of all Republican forms of government in the southern states because of its relationship to the Negro. And of course, you know the Negro is a code word for defeated Moors. So recognize that that principle of operations goes back to the Treaty of Verona. All right? So now let's update and go to the congressional records again to show you the social political relationship so that we can have some rational discussions on principles that have been presented to you from time to time in the House of Ram and why it's presented to you. Congressional record, United States, North America, the 73rd Congress, second session, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the apostle of irredeemable paper money. In the House of Representatives, day 24 of January, Wednesday, 19 and 34, Mr. McFadden speaks before the House. Mr. Chairman, a citizen of the United States has asked me to explain for his benefit and for the benefit of other United States citizens the real meaning of the Roosevelt Gold Bill, the bill which the House passed last Saturday by 360 votes to 40, with 32 members not voting. Mr. Chairman, a law against the Constitution is void. The Gold Bill creates a nullity. Old John Marshall said, that the words of the Constitution are not to be twisted out of their plain, everyday meaning. The Constitution says that Congress shall have power to coin money and to regulate the value thereof. This, Mr. Chairman, means that Congress has power to make coins of metal and to stamp the true value upon each of them. It does not mean that Congress shall refuse to furnish the people of the United States with an adequate coinage, and it does not mean that a theoretical amount of an uncoined metal shall be called a coin. And a coin is an object which may be seen and felt and even heard if one tests the ring of it. Mr. Chairman, the gold bill attempts to cut out, delete, and destroy that part of our great written Constitution pertaining to the power of Congress to coin money and to regulate. That is, to stamp on the metal coin the value thereof. The bill is unconstitutional on its face because it seeks to nullify the Constitution. Moreover, it is a bill which is contrary to the common law and to the law of custom upon which the common law rests. It attempts to legalize robbery. It attempts to force to deprive the people of the United States of their right to the currency of the Constitution. It gives the international bankers power to send the gold belonging to the people of the United States to a place of deposit reserved to themselves in Europe. Mr. Chairman, the gold bill cannot become a valid law by any constitutional means. Now, Mr. Chairman, let us look at the bill to see if the legal hirelings of the Bank of England and their agents, the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve banks, have been able to disguise its purpose. Let us see if they were able to clothe the bristly skeleton of their greed with echoes of glib religiosity, according to the fashion set by the present administration. And the first thing that meets my eye is the title. We read, "A bill to protect the currency system of the United States, to provide for a better use of the monetary gold stock of the United States and for other purposes." It is indeed a bill to protect the present currency system of the United States, but it is a bill to protect it from the just wrath of the United States citizens. It is a bill to save for the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve banks their gigantic monopoly of a special paper currency which they steal from the Treasury and upon which they charge the people of the United States a heavy toll of interest. It is indeed a bill to provide for better use of the monetary gold stock of the United States, if better use means the issuance of two sets of obligations against one piece of security. It is indeed a bill for quote-unquote other purposes. And those purposes which the proponents dare not mention. He's really talking about the Treaty of Verona. Are we following? Now, among the purposes of the bill not mentioned in the title is that of pretending to take into the Treasury the gold now held by the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve banks, and a great effort has been made to have it appear that the Federal Reserve banks are unwilling to surrender the gold they now hold to the United States Treasury. This effort is dishonest for two reasons. First, the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve banks have already made a profit of some billions of dollars out of the president's gold seizures, and those billions were stolen from the people of the United States. And second, that the transfer is fictitious. Hypothecate. Point. The president sought to convince members of the Congress that the Federal Reserve banks were resisting his efforts to have the Treasury take possession of the gold. But one of the members of the Federal Reserve Board spoiled this argument by declaring that the Federal Reserve Board had asked the president to have the Treasury take the gold. You see, Mr. Chairman, under this bill, the United States Treasury has to pay for the gold, although the gold belongs to the people and was taken away from their bank deposits and their cash registers and their pocketbooks in the first place and put into the Federal Reserve banks. And although the Federal Reserve banks tricked and fooled the people into giving it to them for the Federal Reserve currency, which they now refuse to redeem, and although the gold does not belong to the Federal Reserve Bank and to the Federal Reserve Banks, the United States Treasury has to pay the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks for it. Well, how does this bill propose to pay the Federal Reserve outfit, and how does this bill provide that the government shall take over the stolen goods? It provides that the United States government shall give the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Bank's new gold certificates to full value of the loot. The gold certificates will give the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks legal title to the gold, and the United States Treasury will be nothing more than its physical custodian. The Secretary of the Treasury will give the Federal Reserve Banks gold for their new gold certificates whenever they ask for it, and it is a fraudulent transfer. When the individual citizens of the United States were required to surrender their gold, they were required to surrender their gold certificates as well as their gold coin and bullion. The Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks are private corporations, but they did not obey the gold orders. They did not surrender any of the gold coins, gold certificates, or gold bullion. On the contrary, the gold which was commandeered from the people was given to them as a free gift. And now, after they have taken into their possession all the gold belonging to the people, they are ready to make a pretended transfer of that gold to the government. Evidently, there is a law for the common man and no law for the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks. And the common man must toe the mark, but the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks are the agents of the Bank of England. And the law, it seems, does not apply to them. Many of the officials of the Federal Reserve outfit have had charges of impeachment brought against them, but those charges have not been investigated. The Federal Reserve outfit now has in its possession gold coin, gold certificates, and gold bullion. But this bill does not require them to surrender their present holdings of gold certificates. After this bill becomes law, if such a catastrophe should occur, the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks will still hold their present gold certificates. They may exchange these gold certificates for gold between the time of this bill becomes law and the day the President makes his proposed devaluation proclamation. Is not the gift of over $1 trillion in gold a great treasure to bestow upon the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks, the corrupt and sinister organization which has bankrupted the country? Does this not make favorites of the federal crooks who control it? Treaty of Verona. You got to put these things in perspective. Gold in the possession of the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve Banks belongs to the people of the United States. During the last 20 years, under the vicious Federal Reserve Act, they have taken it from the people in exchange for the Federal Reserve currency, and it has not cost them 1 penny. Now they come forward to make pretended transfer of the people's gold coin and bullion to the United States Treasury. Not 1 penny of the gold they pretend to transfer to the United States Treasury is owned by them. Every dollar of it belongs to the individual citizens of the United States. The United States Treasury is to buy it on credit and to pay for it with new gold certificates. How does this transfer title to the United States Treasury? How can the Congress lend itself to such a transaction? Last, may I state that in my opinion, the people's gold unjustly impounded by the Federal Reserve banks should be placed in the people's treasury, but I did not state that it should be placed there as the property of the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve banks, to be withdrawn by them with the gold certificates and to make exportable from the United States Treasury to the Bank for International Settlements in Europe. And what this bill proposes to do in connection with the President's message suggesting that the United States gold may be sent to Europe to be kept in the Bank for International Settlements with the loot of the central banks of other countries is one of the greatest fiscal frauds in history. It is one of the biggest swindles of all time. Again, Mr. Chairman, as you may very well know, the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve banks had paper currency outstanding to the extent of about $5 trillion when the present administration came into power. The currency was redeemable in gold. It constituted the people's title to all the gold held by the Federal Reserve outfit. It constituted a first and paramount lien on all the assets of the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve banks. Instead of taking over the gold and the assets of the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve banks, including the Great Board of the United States wealth, which they have hidden in foreign countries, and honestly administering these assets for the benefits of the people who had been defrauded by the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve banks from their legal liability to redeem their Federal Reserve currency in gold or in lawful money converting into gold, and from the surrender of all their assets. And every dollar that was unlawfully taken from the people of the United States by Roosevelt's gold order was given to the Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve banks in preparation for this great steal, this wholesale robbery of the masses for the benefit of the privileged few. And now the American citizens have lost their gold. An entirely fictitious transfer has been arranged to deceive the people. Mr. Chairman, the President may underrate the mental capacity of the American people as much as he likes, but I venture to say that there is no man in the United States so dumb that he cannot understand how this bill tricks and deceives him. The Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve banks have profited to the extent of $5 trillion or more by being released from their obligation to redeem their outstanding $5 trillion of paper Federal Reserve currency in gold. And they have profited by having had over $1 billion in gold certificates saved to them. And they have profited during the last 20 years by the criminality of the Federal Reserve Board, which never charged them 1 penny in interest on the great mass of Federal Reserve currency they have taken from the government. And they have profited from their own wrongdoing by the unlawful creation of fictitious claims against the United States government and the giving of those claims to foreigners, and they have profited by their control of all the public revenues, and now they come forward with a scheme to sell the gold they have taken from the American people to the Treasury for new gold certificates, which give them a legal title to that gold and permit them to do as they please with it. An era of corruption is culminating in one of the greatest crimes that has ever been perpetrated against the people. Mark my words, Mr. Chairman, there will be trouble here if this bill becomes law. Why, Mr. Chairman, this fiscal fraud, this crime is so stupendous that the instigators and manipulators of it did not dare to have all the transactions performed by one man, and each man did his part and then got out of Washington pretending that he disagreed with the president's money policy or pretending that he was ill. William H. Wooden, who sat beside Albert H. Wiggin on the board of the Federal Reserve of New York, and who had acquiesced in and helped to perpetrate the financial misdeeds which bankrupted the country, is now hiding in Western Sanitarium. And Mr. Sprague, the tool of the international bankers and the employee of the Bank of England, was, in my opinion, put in the Treasury to resign at a certain time and to create uncertainty in the minds of the people by the manner of his going and his subsequent articles pleading for sound money. Mr. Chairman, all of the bickering and the resignations of the artful propaganda that has been thrown around the monetary policy of Franklin Delano Roosevelt cannot disguise the fact that he was selected by the international bankers to carry on the work they started with the Great Depression. And that is the pauperization of the masses and the seizure of American property for their own use and benefit. And that he has lent himself to their schemes by unconstitutionally demanding and assuming the dictatorial powers which will enable him to carry them out. And another purpose of this bill not mentioned in the title title is the transference of a very large quantity of United States gold to the Bank for International Settlements. And one of the chief objects of the gold policy of the present administration is the sending of gold taken by force from the lawful American owners to the Bank for International Settlements in Europe, where it will be kept with the property of the central banks of the world. And according to the Hague Convention, under which the Bank of International Settlements was formed, gold deposited in the vaults of the Bank for International Settlements is safe from seizure. And our gold, when it goes there, will certainly be safe from seizure by the United States. The Bank of International Settlements is dominated by the Bank of England. It is not on American soil, it is in Europe. American gold, therefore, will be kept in Europe. It will be placed where none of the wage slaves of the United States will ever be able to acquire any of it. It will be the capital means of oppression that the international superstate, that financial superstate, which has been the Uncle Sam's gold money ever since, that has been after Uncle Sam's gold money ever since the wealth of this country attracted the attention of greedy European bankers and brought them flocking over here to set up the suction pumps of the Federal Reserve Bank and the Federal Reserve Board, etc. The Bank for International Settlements, quote unquote, is an international bankers' bank. It is a central bank of central banks. The international bankers who brought about the Depression have been drawing gold to themselves from the common people of every land. And it is their intention to use that gold for their own purposes. They propose two kinds of money. Gold, the real money, is what they intend to have for themselves, and paper money, which has no intrinsic value in itself, and which is made out of nothing and is worth nothing unless it can be redeemed by the holder in gold, that is for the common people, or as they call us, the peasants. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the high priest of repudiation, the apostle of irredeemable money, and the man who intends to send the United States gold out of the United States to a place where no American citizen can claim it. This Franklin Delano Roosevelt characterizes all those who do not agree with his monetary policy as mules. If this is true, what an awful mule President Woodrow Wilson must have been. Concerning Andrew Jackson, Wilson said, he had no idea of allowing the country to undertake the fatal experiment of an irredeemable money currency. And this is the fatal experiment Franklin Delano Roosevelt has undertaken. This is a part of his policy of bold experimentation. Not long ago, he told the people at Savannah that George Washington, like himself, was an experimenter. Mr. Chairman, there is no points of resemblance between George Washington and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Experimental or otherwise, George Washington did not take orders from money changers. He did not rob the people of their gold. George Washington abhorred dishonor in all its forms. He would have died before he would have violated his oath of office or tampered with the Constitution of the United States in the manner of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now, Mr. Chairman, let us hear the true purpose of the $2 trillion fund which the bill proposes to set up. And I quote from the prophecies of Henry Markenthal. Mr. Brock's Secretary of the United States Treasury, as shown by the following article, which arranged in the Washington Times, January 16, 1934, Treasury sees the United States needs of blue chips. And when you play poker, you want just as many blue chips as the other fellow. That, in a man's language, was the gist of Secretary Margenthal's summing up of the Roosevelt proposal for a $2 trillion stabilization fund to protect the currency of the United States. In other words, the American government is engaged in probably the greatest gamble of all time. The stake is the credit of the United States. To equal British, when asked why a figure of $2,000 million for the stabilization fund has been asked, Morgenthau said, "We figured we might need another or an amount substantially equal to the British stabilization fund. If we're going to play, we must have as many chips as the other fellow. We want every piece of machinery the other countries have. We want to be in the position to buy gold and to sell gold." The $2,000 million stabilization fund will be derived from the government's profit on the debasing of the value of the dollar to from 50 to 60% of the normal valuation. Fund from profits. If the debasement is 50%, the profit to the government will be $4 trillion in round numbers. A 60% dollar will mean about 666 millions in profit. And out of those profits will come the stabilization fund to be administered by the Secretary of the Treasury, the remainder being available for any government expenditure, Morgenthau said. It is possible that the mere existence of the fund will be sufficient to carry out the law which requires that the Secretary of the Treasury maintain all lawful money of the government on parity with gold. And the Secretary of the Treasury is charged with the responsibility of administration of the fund to carry out that purpose. If a particular type of currency issued, United States notes for instance, should become depreciated in value, the Treasury would go into the market and buy a sufficient quantity of that currency to maintain its parity. And operations in the foreign markets to protect possible depreciation of the dollar would be similar. Let this quotation from Morgenthau go down in history, and long from now, some curious investigator of the present age of witchcraft and magic in the White House may unearth it and reconstruct the financial history of the New Deal, quote unquote, and from it a science from a single part reconstructs the entire animal. Mr. Chairman, it is not the gambler's voice in Mr. Morgenthau's confession which most deserves political attention. We are becoming accustomed here to gambling terms as they are employed by the executive branch of the government, and we can well understand that the executive and his favorites must of necessity speak in the lingo of their kind, and that is a gambler's administration, and all the big shot gamblers are here to revel in it. And Mr. Roosevelt does not deny his gambling propensities. He is a new dealer. He is on his way, and he knows where he is going. He is for a policy of bold experimentation, just as Samuel Insull was for a policy of bold experimentation. He has not been Mr. Smith's patron all these years for nothing, Mr. Chairman, and there is something apart from the vice of gambling to be observed in Mr. Morgenthal's utterance, and that is the entire untruthfulness. He would have us believe that the United States is on one side of the fence and Great Britain on the other. That, of course, is not the case. The United States has been placed in a position of financial servitude to Great Britain, and Mr. Morgenthal's loud-sounding propaganda is designed to conceal that fact from the people. Great pains have been taken to conceal it, and it would be very damaging to this administration if certain people in the United States should find out about the great sums of United States money which have been sent to England during the past summer. And those funds were appropriated by the Congress for the people of the United States. Mr. Chairman, why should tax money paid by the American citizens be sent to London? When England makes her periodical gesture of insult towards the United States by paying a small installment on the war debt she owes us, she pays us a debased coin in debased coins, in quote-unquote token coins to be exact. But when Mr. Roosevelt sends American money to England, he sends it in gold or its equivalent. When Mr. Morgenthau obtains his kitty, quote-unquote, for this, I have been told, is what he calls the proposed Stabilization Fund at the White House a week ago last Sunday evening. American funds will be fed to Europe more expeditiously and with less secrecy than such operations now require. And if Congress puts the people's property into kitty, quote unquote, someone, he cannot be the knight of the bedchamber, can at least pose before the royalty of the knight of the kitty. Understanding that Henry Morgenthau is related by marriage to Herbert Lehman, Jewish governor of the state of New York, and is related by marriage or otherwise to the Saligmans and the international Jewish firm of J&W Seligman, who were publicly shown before a Senate committee of investigation to have offered bribe to a foreign government, and to the Louisons, a firm of Jewish international bankers, and to the Warburgs, whose operations through Kahn, Loeb and Company, the International Acceptance Bank, and the Bank of Manhattan Company, and other foreign domestic institutions under their control have drained billions of dollars out of the United States Treasury, and the bank deposits belong to the United States citizens and to the Strausses, proprietors of R.H. Macy and Company of New York, which is an outlet for foreign goods dumped upon this country at the expense of the United States government, which is compelled to issue paper money on the said foreign goods to the Strausses, and that Mr. Morgenthau is likewise related to the otherwise connected and various other members of the Jewish Banking Committee of New York and London, Amsterdam, and other foreign financial centers, and that he has as his assistant presiding over public funds Earl Bailey, a member of the firm of J&W Seligman, bribe givers, and aforesaid, it seems to me that Henry Morgenthau's presence in the United States Treasury and the request that Congress now gives him a $2 trillion kitty of the people's money for gambling purposes is a striking confirmation of the statement made by me on the floor of the House of Representatives on May the 29th, 1933, which statement was as follows. Now, Mr. Chairman, we have come to the place where we must decide whether we shall serve God or Mammon. Shall we nullify the Constitution at the behest of the money changers who have unlawfully taken all our gold and lawful money into their own possession, or shall we take a stand here in defense of the faith of our fathers? Mr. Chairman, my mind is made up. I will stand by the Constitution. And if I shall fail to do so, I shall expect to be met at the train when I go home to my district by a delegation of honest Pennsylvania citizens with 50 or 100 feet of rope. And I should expect to be escorted to the nearest tree to be taught what it means to vote for a nullification of the Constitution in the House of Representatives. Mr. Chairman, the provisions of this repudiation bill were foretold by a writer in the Dearborn Independent some years ago, and it is therefore nothing novel or original about them. And the writer of the article of the Dearborn Independent made the following quotation prophesying some of the measures which have been introduced here by the President of the United States. 2, confiscation of money in order to regulate its circulation. 3, we must introduce a unit of exchange based on the value of labor units, regardless of whether paper or wood is used as the medium. We will issue money to meet the normal demand of every subject, adding a total sum of every birth and decreasing the total amount of every death. 4, commercial paper will be brought by the government, which will grant loans on a business basis. A measure of this character will prevent stagnation of money, parasitism, and laziness, qualities which were useful to us as long as the Gentiles maintained their independence, but which are not desirable to us when our kingdom comes. 5, we will replace stock exchanges by the great government credit institutions whose functions will be to tax trade paper according to government regulations. And these institutions will be in such a position that they may market or buy as many as half a billion industrial shares a day. And thus all industrial undertakings will become dependent on us. And you may well imagine what power that will give us. Remember, when next you hear the Jewish plan that Gentiles shall do business with their own bits of paper, while Jews keep the gold reserved safely in their own hands, if the crash comes, Gentiles have the paper and the Jews have the gold. It says, Protocol 22, we hold in our hands the greatest modern power, gold. In 2 days, we could free it from our treasuries in all desired qualities or quantities. The Jews are economists, esoteric and exoteric. They have one system to tangle up the Gentile, another which they hope to install when Gentile stupidity has bankrupted the world. The Jews are economists. Note the number of them who teach economics in state universities. It says Protocol 8. We will surround our government with a whole world of economists. It is for this reason that the science of economics is the chief subject of instruction taught by the Jews. Mr. Chairman, have not most of the predictions come to pass? Is it not true that in the United States today the Gentiles have the slips of papers while the Jews have the gold and the lawful money? Is it not this repudiation bill a bill specifically designed and written by the Jewish international money changers themselves in order to perpetrate their power? And what else do you make of, Mr. Chairman? What else do you make of it? Does it not cancel the war debts? Does it not defraud the holders of liberty, bonds, and every other obligation calling for the payment of money? Does it not defraud the veterans of World War and take the value out of their adjusted compensation certificates? Mr. Chairman, do you see this? Do you not see in this kiddie bill the identical features outlined in the Protocols of Zion? Do you not see the Protocols of Zion manifested in the appointment of Mr. Henry Morgenthau as Secretary of the Treasury? Is it not by accident? Is it that a representative and a relative of the money, Jews of Wall Street and foreign parts, has been elevated? Why, Mr. Chairman, this kiddie bill takes the hitherto obscure young Mr. Henry Morgenthau and makes of him a central bank of the United States. It makes him a central bank, an institution which Jefferson declared is one of the deadly hostilities to the free institutions of the United States. It exalts him above all other men under the powers to be granted him. His conduct is not subject to review or control by any other officer of the United States government, not even the president. What this kiddie bill really does is to slide into the hands of Henry Morgenthau the emergency powers which the Congress granted to the president. And those powers which Congress granted to the president, the powers will not lapse. Instead, they are being slyly and dishonestly transferred to the bankers, and after the bankers, in the person of Henry Morgenthau, have exercised them long enough to get the gold out of the United States into their exclusive possession.